Technology is hard. What can I say? Welcome to my weekly board game design stream. I have a thing to share. Share, copy link. Cool. Let me sneeze first, so. Oh, excuse me. Cool. All right. Hello. Welcome to the weekly stream where we start from scratch, start from nothing. You can see I've got my blank page here. And over the course of 2 hours or so, we come up with board game design ideas. I should say plural, because almost always come up with a few concepts that are workable design ideas. Usually don't get to a finished playable game. It's interesting because at PAX West a couple of weeks ago, I did a RPG challenge, making an RPG in 2 hours, pretty much the same thing, and then teaching it to people and running the role-playing game, which was crazy and intense. And since then I've been wondering, for this situation, if I should focus more on getting these games that I'm creating on stream out into the world. But I kind of like the flexibility of it, keeping this session more focused in ideation and not getting too caught up on hammering it into a game shape. I hope that this inspires other people to be creative. I think it's important to point out that this stream is really about the original, or I should say the originating ideation behind a design idea. Some people have more ideas than they know what to do with. If they are getting stuck in the design process, it's in other parts of the process. Getting the prototype done, getting it play tested, development of the game. This particular stream is very focused on just like, what if you don't know where to start? I think it's a very interesting space, or even I think it's very useful for people. You do know where to start. You have lots of ideas that you could be working on, but for whatever reason, you're not particularly inspired to work on them. So I love the idea of this interaction, getting people's creative juices flowing. I think it's just a great activity to, no matter if you're working on an idea, grinding away at it, or you're kind of stuck up and not sure how to move forward. I think this process can be great just to throw it in there. You know, you don't even have to do it for 2 hours. You could do it for 15 minutes. You could do it by yourself. You could do it in a group setting with a bunch of other people. The idea is just to keep it light and casual, and not to worry too much about where the end product ends up. Hello, game biologists. Tell the PAX folks to invite Senior Bob and I to their next design challenge. I guarantee we can ramp up the difficulty level with random facts and inspiration. Oh my gosh. It was hard. Okay, I had McDonald's Play Place and Modern Art and The Last Polar Bear on Earth, and wagering is my mechanic. I don't know where. I need the skull emoji. Or death. Is there like a death one? I'll just do this one. Evil. Alright, so I said at the beginning that I had something to share. I've been talking about, for each stream, you can see here that I have the brainstorm document. I keep all these in a folder, and they, as you'll see as I'm typing, and if you've been watching the stream, it's pretty chaotic, but if there was something that we had said on stream and you forgot exactly what it was, or if we had some cool ideas, I wanted to make sure that those are accessible for people. So I put the link to the Google Drive up on my website, and I have it here as well. What's the best one? What am I calling this? A game stream brainstorms. Cool. Ooh, that's another thing. Playing more around with Twitch, getting more used to the platform. I should enable that for one of the people can type a command and stuff comes up automatically. Because I'd love for people, this is a great first step. I had mentioned before about getting things up in a more usable format so people can actually play the games, play test them, give feedback. But this is a great first step, and I think that's very important if you're getting caught up with your design process. Just releasing things, getting stuff out into the world in some format or another can be a very powerful thing. So I did it. I did the thing that I said I would do, and I'm excited about it. Yay! Ooh. I'm like, did I do that thing correctly? Wait, that's weird. Alright, hold on 1 second. That's really weird. I was posting a thing. On Facebook, posting the link so people could get access to it, and somehow concatenated the Twitch link and the Google Drive link. So that was weird. Alright, cool. Fixed it. I just, one of the things I saw out of the corner of my eye. It's like, why is that a Google Drive thing? Alright. So, as always, I'm open to hearing your game design challenge ideas. Sometimes we base our brainstorms off of a challenge idea, at my discretion, of course. It's always important to have consent for the things that we're moving forward to. Shoot. Okay, marker's fine. Otherwise, I will use my infinite brainstorm abilities to come up with a word to start a mind map from and work from there in an evolving creative process to get my thoughts out onto the page. It's funny though, because creativity is interesting. I'm going to put creativity down here. I don't know if it's going to be the brainstorm or not, but just as a quick sidebar with that, whenever you start a brainstorm or start coming up with game design ideas that you want to work on, anytime you start to get ideas out onto a list or a page or even just talking in a conversation, you might feel like you're being creative, or it's an important part of creativity to just get whatever's in your brain out there. But the kinds of things, our brain uses shortcuts. So the first things that get out onto the page or out into the air as verbalization are going to be what we're already thinking about in some way, things that are easily accessible, more normal, standard type things. Sometimes out of nowhere, you'll say something or write something down and be like, where did that even come from? But a lot of times the first things to come out are not necessarily innovative and creative, which is why mind mapping is great, which is why this stream is great, because talking through things and working down different paths, you can really start to come up with some cool, unique stuff. Anyways, how that ties back into the mind mapping, brainstorming, I feel like every time I sit down here, I usually make myself a warm beverage. So today I have coffee, a little bit of nutmeg and sugar in it. Sometimes it's chai tea. Sometimes it's English, proper English breakfast tea from England, the good stuff. Other types of teas and tasty things. So when I let my mind loose to come up with creative ideas, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. If I was just linearly following my gut, I guess, it would just be all coffee all the time. coffee, tea, fall. We're getting into the fall season. We had a thunderstorm here in Seattle the other day, which is very rare. Thunder and lightning. That's an interesting one, though. Storm could be a good place to start our brainstorm from. Brainstorm, get it? That's funny. Game Biologist says, my recurring theme this week has been the way that memory can control your senses and emotions. Memory, senses, emotions. Also learned today that I still can't talk about 9/11 without falling apart. That's really weird. That's interesting. I feel I've been having that sensation as well. I've been doing a lot of thought exercises and working on mindfulness, meditation, realizing that I get caught up in my brain sometimes. So starting to process and let things, thoughts and ideas move through me without trying to block or judge the things that get ideas caught up and tangled up in your brain. That's where my brain goes, again, naturally, right? We're talking about flow and the way brains work. And it seems to be the case for you and case for me very much so, but thinking about life and happiness, meaningfulness, what's good, what I want more of in my life. Again, trying not to judge too much what's good and bad, but encouraging how can I create more, work more towards my goals, embody the kinds of things that I want to see, get rid of some of the things that are painful or energy draining or just aren't giving a lot of value to my life the way that it is. And I do often find myself going down the memory lane, thinking of the times in my past, a lot of times from childhood, from being younger and carefree, right? Where you're sitting in a playground, walking beside the ocean, looking in a tidal pool, and the sensory experiences of those and the emotions that are tied up in them. Game Biologist continues, also had flashbacks of using grease pencils for school assignments when talking to a couple of kids about what my school days were like. My hands remember how using them felt. My nose remembered how they smell. Grease pencils. That does look very satisfying, a thing to play with. And the sound of the paper wrapper getting unrolled. That's beautiful. I love the senses and sensory experiences that we have going here. I do want to make a sidebar for 9/11 too. Don't want to talk too much about it because I realize it could be very stressful and traumatic for people, but I had realized that it's tomorrow, it just struck me all of a sudden. That was almost 20 years ago. Is that right? Wow, yeah. Because I was 18 and just about ready to go off to college. It was like a few weeks, like a week, because in September. And I remember college started later for the school that I was going to, so I was still at home and just by myself too. It was really weird because I guess my siblings must have been at school, my parents were at work, and for whatever reason I was just by myself in the house, couldn't go anywhere. It's just having that experience, very potent and poignant. Hello, Senior Bob. Welcome to the chat. Already we're going straight to emotion, straight to memory and history and thought. So, yes, welcome into our shared experience. Game Biologist says, 9/11 is weirdly bittersweet because I found out years later that one of my favorite high school teachers was on a plane that day that crashed. Oh my gosh. So it's this whole Mr. T taught me CPR and told us all these stories about how we'd use it randomly, save people's lives all the time once we knew it. And then remembering everything else. Yeah, that's just so crazy to think about. It's weird because, and I think this is relevant to what we're talking about, history, emotion, interconnectedness. I think I want to talk about. Just a quick point out, usually we start with a mind map, but now we're kind of bouncing around for things that haven't quite settled on something, which is okay as well, and it's important if you're talking about a process. If you have things that you usually follow, don't get too caught up in the form or the structure of it. It's better to sometimes go where the road leads you. What I was going to say about interconnectedness, a lot of times these things that happen, traumatic things, big things, bad things, if it's not very connected to you, it's easy to, I don't want to say think that it doesn't exist, but it's not front and present in your mind. Like, you know about it, but there's the degrees of separation there. And part of the important part of talking about these things, listening, surfacing the stories, is to realize you're not as separated. We're not as separated as we think. And there's always degrees of connection that we realize once we start to dig into these things. So I'm trying to decide what the best direction to go today. So we go in a couple of different directions. I don't want to say not afraid. I'm definitely okay with digging into things historical, into personal experience, into emotion. I think an important part of my design philosophy and the things we tend to talk about on this stream is we want to not shy away from different types of experiences. And what was the game that I was talking about with someone the other day? So so it was on the Table Take stream last Friday that we were talking about historical games, because I believe there was a Vietnam War board game that was not talking about the politics. It was just a traditional war game, blocks on a map, moving pieces, combat simulation, without a lot of the human factor to it. And the fact that it was the Vietnam War, there were multiple people amongst the Table Stakes hosts. So Christian was talking about a relation who had been in the combat. Manzai knew people or had relatives who had been in the combat as well. And so we got a little bit into the discussion of, what kinds of things can you and should you make games about. So you talk about video games a lot of times. Like, there's a lot of very modern combats that have video games made about them. A lot of things that are still very potent and emotional for people. And on the one hand, you could say, oh, well, if I make a game about this thing, a game most people think about is fun, I'm reducing the seriousness of it, right? By just putting mechanics onto this thing. So you could say that. the other way that you could go is say, by making it into a game, it becomes something that is more accessible, something that people will opt into with the wrapper of the game, where they, might not watch a documentary or read a book about this subject, but they might play a game about it. And in that case, they are exposed to this thing and maybe learn a little bit more about it. It might inspire them to seek out more information about it. So it's complex. There's a lot of stuff going on around, whether you should make games about these serious topics. Of course, I think it's very important, if you are going to deal with these topics, to have an awareness of the greater culture that's going around, that surrounds them. Taking a more modern combat and reducing it to this, having like a history game, a war game, where you move the pieces around and simulate these without having any of the history or story around it. Oh, excuse me. It's a little questionable to me. I think that it is important to, if you're going to surface this conflict and make money off it, right? The games are designed to sell copies. I think that it is important to have an awareness. And I think the GMT games that I've played to date tend to do that pretty well. Or the ones that are similar to that, because I don't think I played 13 Days, which is apparently like Twilight Struggle light. 13 Days, I don't believe it is a GMT game, but it does give a sense of the history and the escalating tensions and represent that a little bit. Joe Sondow, hello. A documentary is usually more fun than an article, and a movie is usually more fun than a documentary. As long as it's done respectfully, making it accessible can be a good thing. But making it fun can be a minefield. Yeah. What does that mean? To take this thing that gives pain to people and to make that into something enjoyable. Game just says, having a lines and veils mechanic for board games feels like it would be useful for fresher wounds, where some people with direct memories can handle the emotions at arm's length, and people without that immediacy could sink in more deeply to the emotional experience. I'm going to put this on our page. Lines and veils. If you don't do a lot of more indie RPGs, you might not have heard of this term, lines and veils, before. And I believe a lot of people in the role-playing games community are very aware of these types of things, and I really appreciate the effort that they put into it. So the concept of lines and veils in a role-playing context is that you go around in the circle. You can either talk about it publicly or write on a piece of paper so it's anonymous, and lines are topics that you don't want to cross. Like, you don't want to cross the line. You don't want to even have them be mentioned. So, like violence against animals, for example, you could write that as a thing. Like, I don't even want it to be implied that this exists in our world. Veils are things that can happen off screen, but that you don't necessarily dig into too much. So you can, I'm like trying to come up with these things. So for war, for example, could be an example of a veil. So in the role-playing game, you could mention that 200 years ago, there was a war that helped to shape this country, but you won't have graphic descriptions of what it's like to go to war. I want to find a good, this looks like a pretty good description of it. I want to post a link in the chat because I think it's a very cool and interesting thing to dig into. Sorry. I love that we get very serious here sometimes, but then also go back to humor. Because I don't want this to be a type of a stream where people get overwhelmed by the bad things in the world. So it's good to have some lightness in there as well. Senior Bob wrote no bards. What was that? That came up. Somebody posted their rules for their game, because for role playing, again, you usually have a discussion about the kinds of things, not necessarily you're doing lines and veils, but just what you want, what you don't want. And there was a post going around on Twitter recently where that was, I saw the piece of paper, and it was a few different, more serious things, and then just said no bards. That was really funny. All right, more info on lines and veils here. Cool. Some more info if you want to check that out. Yeah, so we're talking about this lines and veils in role-playing games, but it doesn't always come up in a board game context, and that's actually something in the community that there's been a fair amount of discussion around recently, specifically from a playtesting perspective. So, yeah, I was talking about it on Twitter recently because it's not exactly come up in our playtesting group. There's been, in the community, there's been a couple of games that are dealing with tough topics that I've seen coming out. Things dealing with tough topics and things that are like Cards Against Humanity-ish, that are using borderline humor, I guess I'll say. And I had posted on Twitter that it's very important in a playtesting perspective to give people information about what they're getting into, like consent, basically, is what it comes down to. So describe the kinds of things that you're creating and the kinds of things they should expect from the game that they're about to playtest. And it was interesting because role-playing games have a pretty established history of doing that, whereas for board games, you don't usually get into that. You know, you're playing a game with people, you're like, oh, we're going to play this game. You know, you don't necessarily talk about the things that are included in it. And I think that's something that's important, at least to let your groups and your communities know that there is the option to have those conversations. Oh, Stephanie Straw posted the Bards thing. Oh, yeah, that was a good one. Gameball just says, as not a D&D player, all that's running in my head now is Brave Sir Robin ran away. Bravely, bravely ran away. A classic movie. Absolutely. All right. So, got some good discussions going on here. Trying to process this all in my brain and see how we want to move forward on this. We don't have to come up with a solid game concept, but I like to move it in that direction. Flow. Or even a genre, you know, sensory experiences. Just gonna write out some of these notes to foment it and see what my brain comes up with once I have it all written on the page. Degrees of connection. Also, the more I do this, I want to try and do things different than we've done in the past. And a couple of weeks ago, we did have one where we focused on pieces on a board and moving them closer and farther away depending on their relationships to each other, getting to know each other. And also this mechanic of a string with knots in it, measuring distance and moving up and down the knotted strings, which are super cool and I want to play around with more. John Sondow says, that is one of the best reasons I can think of for someone to forbid bards if they fear ridicule, right? You don't want to have someone coming around who's making bad, letting everyone know how embarrassing you are. Stephanie hates bards. I mean, that's what's going around the internet. I can neither confirm nor deny. Gamebottle says, I found it odd but understandable that the playtesting protocols I learned in college about human research subjects when I first started playtesting other people's stuff, they didn't give disclaimers and tell playtesters that they can quit whenever they want. It's a basic research ethics thing we had to learn. Yes. I'm going to post this. I'm going to bold this, actually. Because we touched a little bit on that, but I run a playtesting group. We meet every week. I think a lot of us come to it from a hobbyist background. A lot of people come to it just from playing a lot of games and maybe house ruling or modding. And yeah, if you come to it from a game playing perspective as opposed to a design research perspective, you might not have this understanding of the things that are important, just like quitting every time for the psychology experiments. Although it makes me think back, I used to be experimented on as a person in college, because it's a great way to make money. I remember having electrodes glued to my head, and there was things with quarters. I don't remember them saying that you can quit at any time, but I think it's an important part of anything that you opt into. And these are some things, there's been some situations in the group where code of conduct and consent and things have come up. And I think it's important to talk about and to have that printed as well as a thing that people can refer to. I also apparently get a little incoherent when I try to eat dinner and type simultaneously. Dinner. Lines and veils. Research protocols. Research subjects. Experimentation. Just research in general. Bards. See, this could be an interesting direction. How can we tie all these things together, right? We're talking about stuff, ideas are flying around, bards and experimentation, bards singing about experimentation, no bards allowed. The Great Bard Ban. I don't know where we're going design-wise with this stream. I'm going to write that down as a potential stream title. Going back and forth between design ideas and then playtesting, philosophy, all very important things to discuss. And all the time, letting the creative juices flow. Talking about ideas, things that surface. It's a great space to talk about these things, get them out in the open. Great Bard Ban of 2019. Gamaldus, what if you lived in a society where bards were considered a lower life form than mice and were thus used as a common research animal? It's a pen. It's funny that you mentioned that. It makes me think of Hitchhiker's Guide. No spoilers. Is it, how long has that book been around? Like 40, 50 years? Still no spoilers, because you should read the book, because it's got a lot of cool stuff in there. Right, bards, spell this correctly. Research subjects. And they sing their experience. I want to keep lines and veils up here as well. No bards. No bards as the game title. No bards allowed. Alright, thinking about, do you go silly or serious with this? For example, you could say bards bring joy, government crackdown, on music. You could have a Footloose vibe to this. Alright, government crackdown. Government crackdown. On music. Context is good. Footloose. And then on the other end of the spectrum is bards are annoying. It's an interesting, if you do think about traditional role-playing, some of the more, I say traditional role-playing, Dungeons and Dragons, the role-playing game that most people will think about and people are more likely to have had experience with. I've actually never played a bard or played in a party where there is a bard, but my understanding is that bards have the potential to warp the game, which is interesting. Like, there's a few classes. I'm playing a warlock right now, and some of the things and abilities that I have access to can really change the dynamics of the game. I'm just going to spitball a little bit here. If anyone has anything to say about bards, feel free to throw it in the chat as well. From what I know about bards, their abilities are very technical and utility. As a newer player to the game, I don't want to say this, they didn't tell me not to be a bard, but they suggested for the way that I want to play the game, because I mostly got excited about the instrument part. I wanted to burst into song at random times, but for the way the mechanics actually play out, for the things that I wanted to do in the game, a bard can be a little bit trickier for that. You know, if you just want to, and more complex mechanically, which can slow the game down. It works better if you have experience with the game. Have a lot of experience. With the system. Even playing the warlock character, I'm starting to get a lot of spells and abilities, shuffling through my hand, trying to decide what the best thing to do is. Sometimes I'm almost happy when my spell slots are exhausted because it limits my decision field down. But there can be a lot of stuff with bards with manipulation, position, buffing other characters, abilities that have AoE effects. And don't take any of this for certain, because I have to read up a little bit more on what they do. So there's the mechanical aspects of it. And then there's the part of just like, which could be as well, like, do you want someone randomly bursting into song all the time? Which I think is great. Kimoto says, how long does it take a bard to navigate a maze? I feel like this is a joke, and I want to see what the answer is. Do they get slowed down by being struck by inspiration halfway through, stopping, and composing an epic about the experience? That's a good question. Senior Bob, all the players are assembling an adventuring party, and by the end of the game, you want to have the least amount of bards in your party. Oh my gosh, it's like abandon all artichokes, except abandon all bards. But we need to make it alliterative. Also, no offense to anyone who's a bard or anyone who loves bards. This is not meant to be to make anyone feel bad about their character choices. And, you know, I would love to be a bard someday. And I think I would love to have a bard in my party. But apparently there's things that about them that people aren't as excited about. Alright. Joe says, I don't think I've played with a bard either. Maybe I did, but they didn't really act very bard-like. Yeah, that's the thing too. There's definitely a very wide range of ways in which you can embody a, let's say, character. Oops. Character / class in a role-playing game, which is interesting compared to more traditional board game. Where there's usually a more structured way of interacting with the game. Joe says, I'm less enthusiastic about bards than most people for the same reason. I'm less enthusiastic about real-life musicians than real people. It's fair. Senior Bob says, so I've played very little D&D, but shouldn't bards have, like, magical ability through music putting monsters to sleep? They use music to magically inspire friends and psychologically harm enemies. Yeah, a lot of it with again is pretty complex abilities, which can be tricky for a newer player. And also when you're playing the character, a lot of times the fantasy of playing a role-playing game is, I'm just gonna say, do the stuff of the game is what I always say, right? Do the stuff of the game. Shoot magic missiles. Fireballs, if you're into that. Swing a big sword. Hit things with it. barbarian raging and grappling all the things. And it's hard to figure out exactly where Bard fits into that simplified view of what a role-playing game is like. Plays music and sings. Usually don't do a lot of damage. Which again, in the thing I'm learning more and more by playing and by reading a lot about role-playing games is Dungeons & Dragons is very much a combat simulation game. You can use the mechanics of the system to play a different style of game. Often heavily it's a way of simulating something where you have a single character. So if you think something like Overwatch or Heroes of the Storm, League of Legends, a MOBA, or even like a Call of Duty or a Halo, like you're playing your person and going out there and trying to destroy your enemies. It's interesting because I talk a lot with Phil about this, and he really likes playing support. He's been a bard before in Dungeons and Dragons and really enjoyed it. He likes being a support character. He likes being a utility tech character. There isn't often a lot of space or support for the tech healer utility character. There is healing in Dungeons and Dragons, at least in our campaign. It's very important to have that sustain, but nobody is just the healer. Nobody wants to play just the healer because you want to do stuff. I think what I'm trying to get at is you want to have agency on your own, which if you're a tech or support or utility character, you really need to work synergistically with people. And that doesn't always, and it's harder to make that work, right? And it doesn't always, things don't always align to make that a possibility. In a world where most of the people are aggressors, and have singular self-directed agency, you can get left out. So if it was a system where everyone needed to work together and all of the abilities were synergistic, it would be easier to be that utility character because everybody would be doing that and caring about what everybody else was doing. But in most of these types of games, the digital combat games as well, there are a lot of aggressors, and for whatever reason, the way that these games, I say for whatever reason, because of the types of people who were creating these games, because they came from heroes, superheroes, war games, a very hero, singular, like masculine sort of an energy, it becomes this thing where you are this person, and the same, the Lone Ranger type of things, the singular person fighting off the hordes of enemies. It's the inspiration for a lot of these types of games. Like, you want to feel powerful. Very Western thing, right? Don't want to have to rely on other people or characters. So this is the sort of context that we're working in. And again, for the bards thing, could have been a joke. I don't want to put words into people's mouths for what their situations are, whether they're just joking about not having bards, whether it's just bards being annoying, whether bards are mechanically complicated, looking for a more seamless gameplay experience. But for what we're taking this seed of inspiration and moving forward with it, talking about all these reasons that bards support characters, utility characters, all the things that they have going on there. Game Biologist says, can the bard be like the hero's theme music in I'm Gonna Get You Sucker? I'm gonna have to look. I'm gonna have to listen to that after the show. Mr. Matthew Plays, welcome. Ooh, RPG design. We've been going very RPG-ish recently. Probably because I've been getting into more RPG design lately. But I'm also very interested in taking some of the inspiration from role-playing games and pulling them back into board games, the crossover board game storytelling game. And it's also just great space for inspiration. Like, it might not end up as a role-playing game. You could just do like a total abstract strategy game where you have the X's are your bards. Maybe it's a cooperative game where you're trying to herd the bards out of the grid. Ah! That was funny. Pressed a button and went to a totally different screen. Or maybe the bards were the heroes all along. Maybe the bards are too powerful. So the evil bard haters are trying to get rid of them. I'm just gonna write bards equal Jedi. Cool. We're getting some flavor here. We don't have mechanics at all. Again, this could end up being an abstract game. It could be a role-playing game called No Bards Allowed. The Great Bard Ban. Where you're playing as people trying to get rid of the bards, or maybe you're playing as all bards who have to live in this world where they are getting a lot of hate. Who have to make their way in a world where bards have it really rough. Have it really rough, sure. Bards are too powerful. Evil bard haters. Play as the bards or the ones trying to get rid of them. So you're the evil bard masters. I love that we're just getting into bards. This is fabulous. Evil bard masters. Or maybe the bards were the evil ones the whole time. The bards are the supervillains. Bent on world musicification. Musicification. It's got to be an easy way to write that. Bards equal guardian angels. Got to be stealthy so the norms don't realize they're actually crazy powerful and helping them. Ooh. Here. Bards versus mimes? Oh my gosh. Bards versus mimes. This is interesting here, right? Because we're getting into touching up a little bit on stereotypes, classifications, worldviews, playing around with what the thing is versus the way that different people see the thing. Again, this all came up because of a funny tweet. Not really having been in the culture long enough. Like, I would love to post this. I might end up posting this on Twitter. Post a Bard survey on Twitter. I'd like to dig into this a little bit and see, like, is this a wide-ranging thing? Do people have food? Do people have really strong feelings about bards? What are some of the stereotypes, I guess, people have around different classes? So for me, coming into role-playing, the classes is really secondary. You know, when you have to pick your race and your class going into Dungeons and Dragons, I'm like, I don't know, I just want to be a person flavor-wise. Like, I have my backstory of the things that happened to me. And then picking your class for me is like, well, I guess this is the fighting part really isn't as interesting for me. I just want to tell a story with my friends, get into difficult situations, make tough choices, see the ramifications of our actions on us as individuals, on our group dynamics, and then the world at large. Not to say that I don't think there should be combat in the game. And when I talk about it that way, a lot of people point out, it's like, well, it's not a game. You know, if you're telling a story together without having mechanics to it, it's not really game. Like, okay, whatever. But it does make me ponder and think about what are the game-like aspects in a role-playing game. How game-like do you want it or need it to be? Cinder Bob. Corrupted bards transform people into sheet music. I like that. I was also having another thought up here as well before I went off on a tangent. Guardian angels play as musicians, other performers in modern day. Who are secretly powerful and trying to protect people. Okay, Snowball says, back to memory. There used to be a Donnie and Marie Osmond variety show on TV when I was a kid. Super powerful musicians. And a regular guest was Mummenschanz. Super weird mime troupe with light elements of body horror if you're a kid. Oh my gosh. Yeah, there's weird stuff on TV sometimes. Say, Rob, I just want to be Link. I've showed Mummenschanz to people at work, and they got a little freaked out. I gotta look this up now. I need to... Total 180. Changing our game concept for the day. Oh my gosh. Wow. Yeah, I don't even know if I want to post this. This looks super freaky. That's my reaction to Mummenschanz. Yeah, just a little Google foo for you there if you want to. Just click on a link and not have to look that up yourself. There's some weird stuff going on. I gotta make sure that that's posted, because that seems ripe for games or something. Mummenschanz. Post the link there too. Yeah, because that ties into... As weird as bards versus mimes was at first glance, you do have a little something going on there with the Mummenschanz. And they're... Okay. I feel like there's something here, because the... okay, we're doing bards versus mimes. Because they are opposites, right? And here, bards. So there's sound, mimes, no sound, communicate through motion, are, say, harder to interpret, easy to work in, secret messages. So you could make them be opposites, right? You can also have hidden messages in song. Maybe it's harder. Communicate through music versus communicating through motion. Okay. Music versus motion. I'm just gonna keep brainstorming here because I got all sorts of stuff coming out from here. These ideas. There's two rival cabals, musicians, and the is that because it's Mummenschanz, mummer. So a mummer is a mime, I believe. Musicians and the mummers. I think it sounds a little more ominous than mimes. Spreading their messages in their own very distinct ways. Ears versus eyes, yeah. Receiving the message through your ears versus receiving the message through your eyes. Communicating with your voice, instrument, and body a little bit. Dancing, standing still, maybe have these two tropes more separated than they traditionally would be. Your body, motions, props, maybe? Contorting. Contorting your body versus... Alright, let's dig in a little bit to music versus motion. Down here. Both can be beautiful or creepy. Distorted, discordant is the word I'm looking for. Contorted. I'm seeing a lot of potential word roots passing by each other here. Gameball just says, a blind person can never be defeated by a mime. A deaf person can never be defeated by a bard. I don't know if we're coming up with a game here, but I feel like we're coming up with an interesting world / universe. And also something narrative, potentially. Like, we could write a book about this, or at least a short story. Which I think is interesting and cool, and there's always a million different ways in which you can be creative. I like to talk about being medium agnostic and listening to whatever medium becomes the right place for whatever you want to make. So for games, I've mostly designed board games to date, but if I'm coming up with a game idea and I realize that I really like the idea, but it would be better as a digital game, then I should create it as a digital game instead of trying to force the concept to fit a medium that I'm more comfortable creating in, because you can always learn to work in other mediums. So the cabal of the musicians employs blind people to fight against the mummers. Oh man, okay. This is getting a little intense and a little dark, but thinking about that there's the ritual of blindness. Makes me think of Illidan from the Warcraft universe, and how you have to, like, as part of the ritual, put out your eyes so you can see have the demon sight. Your enemies for the most dedicated. Then there are also various devices used if you're not dedicated enough to go through with the ritual. And there's the cabal of mummers, employs deaf people to fight against the musicians. Spelling is hard. Musicians have to go through the ritual of deafness. The blinding, the deafening. Protect against your enemies. Then there are also various devices. What about a nearsighted person? Yeah. There's different tiers of dedication. Dedication, protection, ability. As a nearsighted person, you could have some immunity to the effect of the mummers. Also, there's communication versus weaponization. The music slash mimicry, I don't know what the right term for that is, conveys information, subtly influences, causes damage. A lot of different directions to go with this. Gimbal just nearsighted folks are screwed. No superpowers at all. Can't see well enough to escape, but can see well enough to know their doom is upon them. I like that. Or folks with disabilities are seen as blessed. Yeah, that's where I was thinking about going with it. A disability becomes a superpower and makes these folks valued and respected. Yeah. So I'm thinking, I still don't see exactly how this fits into a game, but as a novel, narrative, or even a graphic novel or comic book, just created a new universe. I had to look this up though and see if this is already a thing. That would be awesome. It would also make me sad. Versus mimes. Musicians versus mimes. Miming and instrumental performance. Miming instrument playing is the musical instrument equivalent of lip syncing and singing. Thinking of like the air guitar competitions that people have. It's weird. I'm not seeing anything come up right away. Senior Bob, a blurry shape covered in black and white stripes approaches, becoming gradually more in focus. Digging a little bit more into the why do I see some spaces here? The devices you might have, like that purposefully blind you temporarily, limit your vision, drugs that distort your vision or your auditory senses, like the eye drops at the eye doctor. Joe says nearsighted folks are immune from going insane from seeing unspeakable horrors. Cthulhu is just a blurry jerk. I like that. Ninjas with sparkly gel night masks. You know, I am picturing that as one of the devices. Just the sleep mask. Sleep masks are like the puffy ones. Closed eyes on the outside of the mask. I'm also envisioning the gas masks. Should get one of those eye cooling gel masks. Might be nice. Are you my mummy? Oh my gosh, you are so evil. Yes, exactly. Side note, my friends made me watch Doctor Who. I did actually really enjoy it, but going into it, I asked them if it was creepy or scary, because I don't really like watching scary things. They're like, no, it's not scary at all. It's totally not scary. And then, of course, we watched the Are You My Mummy episode and the Weeping Angel episode. I'm like, what the fuck? What is this thing that you have shown me? I am terrified. I am having nightmares now because this is very scary. You tricked me. Still glad that I watched it because it is very good, but also much scarier than people will tell you if you're a big wimp like me. Doctor Who is horror for kids. It's a good way of putting it, because I am actually a child, and so that's about the level of scariness that it scares me. Are You My Mummy's one of the scariest bits. It is! It's so bad. It's very scary. Incredibly scary. Alright, friends. Yeah, your friends trolled you. I know, right? Alright, I actually need to get a little bit more water. I don't want to stop the stream just yet, so if you will bear with me for a couple of minutes, I'm going to put the stream on pause for a second, grab some water, and I'll be right back. So don't go anywhere. I shall return. turn on my mic. Thank you for your patience. I have returned. Nice and hydrated. Keep my voice fresh. So we're definitely going very creepy with this concept. What did I miss here? There's a ton of really good Doctor Who with minimal creepiness. Yeah, exactly. And that was the reason, too, because we weren't watching them in order or anything. Again, friends being total trolls with, let's just watch the scariest episodes. Although, like, I'm not a huge fan of scary stuff, but they were very well done. And like, nothing... I was gonna say nothing super bad happened. Sometimes people do die in the episodes. I think the angels might have eaten some people or whatever, but it was after having watched it. Like, it's still very scary, but it was also good. So balancing out those two things. This good one, minimal creepiness. The episodes will mess you up. Still flashbacks to an episode from the 80s with giant bugs in space. All right. I have that episode permanently engraved on my brain. I don't need it engraved into a VHS because it is in there, never leaving, pops up at the most inopportune of times. The Stones of Blood was my mess up head episode. I don't even know if I want to look that up. I don't know what that is. Like, I don't want to know. I want to know, but I don't want to know. Alright, so we got some great flavor going here. Love this evolution of concepts and ideas, from musicians to mimes to mummies to Doctor Who. I feel this could be a Doctor Who episode. It all ties in back together. So yeah, I think what we've come up with and what we've created here is very interesting. I love the direction that our ideation has taken for today. Play around with it a little bit. We'll see if we come up with some ideas to make it into a game. It doesn't have to be a game though. I think just coming up with a cool world, a cool concept, whether it ends up being mechanical or not, is still a very valuable thing. So right away, role-playing game-wise, or storytelling game-wise, we have a lot of cool stuff going on here, right? Like, talking about this as a role-playing game. Create your characters, play as one side or the other, or have it as a competitive role-playing game. Not that there's a lot of those out there. Play as people on both sides. Here's a question for this. What are they fighting for or about? Is it a dystopian world in which they're trying to gain dominance? The musicians are trying to banish sight. Get real dark with it, right? And seeing things. Uplift sound and music as the truth and the light. The mummers are trying to banish sound and things listened to. Uplift sight and scenes as the truth and the light. Joe says, old Doctor Who tends to be so low budget, it's hard to be affected by it now. Rubber masks and spray painted rocks. Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's, again, we're here putting a pin in this. We're not going to go too far in this sidebar. But I would like to mention, I think that's one of the things that Doctor Who has done. Like, you don't have to make things look like, what is the scariest thing, right? Is it the special effects Predator where it looks like a very scary monster, right? Sometimes just the pacing and the lighting and keeping the villains hidden, you know, or having that psychological horror can be more scary. That's why a lot of older scary movies still hold up. And a lot of more modern ones kind of fall apart under closer inspection. Because it's just like, and here's the monster, it's so scary. It's like, well, it's not really, I guess so. It's got like creepy eyes and it's bleeding or something, but yeah, but the, like, especially like the Weeping Angel, I don't know, what is, oh god, I'm looking up Weeping Angel on the internet. I hope that you're happy about that. Let's see when the first episode of this was. Oh, first appearance was in Blink in 2007. Really? I thought it would have been older than that. Okay. Yeah, I guess it's not necessarily a great comparison, but I don't think there's any crazy special effects. There's this statue that was farther away, and then they look away, and then it's closer behind them. Like, there weren't necessarily a ton of crazy special effects for, like, seeing the thing swoop in. The scary part about that was that you never did see it move, which was, I love how they managed to convey the creepiness of that without too closely illustrating it. The old Doctor Who was less emotional than the new Doctor Who. Battle of the Bards sounds more Red Dwarf. Were the monsters in Bird Box actually mimes? I never watched it. Battle of the Bards, that's great. I'm going to make a note of that. Battle of the Bards. It also sounds a little bit Tenacious D, right? Sight and sound are both senses humans usually have. What are some senses that humans don't have? That is a good question. And another fun potential direction to go into. How mechanics for your... good in general. Mechanically, your strengths become weaknesses when you encounter the enemy. I want to dig into this a little bit if we are starting to think of mechanics and how this would play out. What I really like about this concept, whatever it ends up being, is that things that are normally strengths, you know, you have very good hearing, you have very good sight in a role-playing game. These are skills that you can tech into. But I like this idea that in a lot of situations, like if you can hear very well, you can be sneakier, make sure you don't get into situations, but once you're in the situations... Once you do get into a combat situation, you become a lot weaker from having those abilities. It's become a detriment. Let's sidebar over here too for senses that humans don't have. ESP, extrasensory. Ooh. This is a cool direction. Feel the vibrations. You can look at a lot of things that animals can do. Their superhuman strengths. Feel the vibrations of the ground from creatures moving nearby. Tell the size of the creature, whether it's food. Feel the heat of a nearby creature. Superhuman strengths, things that animals can do. Superheroes often have things like this. Like a lot of abilities superheroes have to do with the senses, right? See infrared, heat signatures, see through things. Yes, it was synesthesia? Is that the thing that I'm thinking of? And how do you spell it if it is? Synesthesia, yeah. Smell colors. Synesthesia. Scary recent Doctor Who monster, Bubble Wrap. I need to catch up on those episodes. Because it was a lot of fun, and just hearing the stories about it, I'm like, oh, I want to know what that is now. Bubble Wrap, Doctor Who. Killer Bubble Wrap? What? Oh my gosh. Oh man, I want to look this up so bad, but I also don't want to be spoiled on it, so I'm just gonna have it be there, because that looks really cool. Human senses of sight and sound are also very limited. There are critters that can see wavelengths well outside our visible spectrum. Absolutely. Magnetic fields, ghosts, and echoes of previous events. Inclement weather, incoming weather, psychometry. Touch an object, know its backstory. Copy. I'm just gonna paste all these in here because this is good. Good stuff. Yeah, I would say a lot of these are things that animals can do, things that superheroes can do. Abilities in D&D. We just had our cleric use talk with dead or speak with dead, where you can animate a corpse and ask it 5 questions, and it will answer them based on its experience in life. Kimbalda says, we'll sometimes joke that the cat's looking at ghosts when she starts intently staring at nothing. Oh my gosh. Yes. Our cats have that. Have ghost sight. Bubble Wrap was the one that skewered Amazon. Seeing auras, yes. Incoming weather. Aruas. Auras. Spelling's hard. The Doctor Who episode about Amazon is called Kerblam. And this is... that looks so creepy. Just like, it's not creepy. It's not that creepy. And just like, it is so creepy. It is super, like, you're like, oh, this one isn't that creepy. And all of a sudden, it's like, here's a bunch of ones that are also, just looking at the screenshots, they're like, so creepy. Alright. Games. Going back to games. We have some light character creation notes. More on character for if this is a potential role-playing game. Pick your location on a scale of no sense to super sense. Abilities and detriments. Based on a scale. Completely deaf to super hearing. You'd be immune to music. You also can't hear danger approaching. If you're super hearing, very susceptible to the bard's powers. Susceptible. Use ability for more information gathering. And it goes without saying, we are talking about things that are disabilities or other abilities, scales of abilities within the real world. And it's important, you know, going back to what we were talking at the beginning of the stream about history, lived experiences, lines and veils. Important to realize that real people in the real world have these spectrums of abilities. And I think it's a good thing to be able to surface this and talk about this and put it into a game for people to experience. I also think it's very important if you are developing a game with these spectrums of abilities to talk with and consult with people who are living these situations, so you make sure that you approach it in a sensitive manner. So we've taken a few notes about potentially doing a role-playing thing with this. You can also do a more mechanical, I don't know, board game. So it can just be a system within a larger role-playing system, but you can also focus just on this spectrum and having a spectrum of abilities modifying your abilities with devices to improve your reaction, I guess I'll say, to certain situations. Detriment to your reaction in other. And it could, again, tie it all back to the Doctor Who conversation. There, again, I'm definitely not an expert. I've seen a bunch of the episodes, but it's been a while. So there have been situations in which you cover your eyes, ears, for the Weeping Angel. You have to not close your eyes. Using normal abilities for better or for worse. Some games heavily blur the line between board game and RPG, although they almost always feel more like one or another. Yeah. That's the reason we could go in either direction for this. You have a board game type situation where you focus on where you have characters that you create and you're coming from a perspective, but it's not necessarily super mechanical. You might have some flavor about your character or your group that you're playing, which can really add to the game, even if it ends up becoming, I'm just doing the stuff of my group or of my character, especially if you are doing an asymmetrical game. A lot of times there's a lot of benefit for having a strong flavor there. Theme, flavor isn't strictly mechanical. Hello, I work at your local 711. Seems like there's some trolling going on here. There's a lot of people who play board games and a lot of people who design board games for a living, including myself. I mean, I think we'll say for Monopoly, it is very widely played. There are a lot of mass market games like that that are very approachable for a wide audience. And there's a lot of discussion, especially on board game Twitter, about relative merits of certain games. I was teaching a class recently where someone asked me, like, what is your opinion on Monopoly? Is Monopoly a good game? And I think anything that gets people to play more board games is a good thing. I think, like, if people talk about being a board game designer and people will say, oh, like Monopoly, be like, well, yeah, Monopoly is a board game and there's other board games as well. Talk about Settlers of Catan, talk about Azul, different, also better known games that are pretty popular. And I think it's important to let people like what they're gonna like. If people really enjoy Monopoly, playing it, that's good on them. don't want to yuck on people's yum, I think is important. All right, how much time we got left here? Got about 10 minutes. Got a few fun ideas here for potential games. Back to, what do we have? No bards allowed, evil bard masters, musicians versus mummers. I think we definitely have something interesting here, just looking at a spectrum and potentially, say, collecting characters along a spectrum using items or abilities collected over time in order to succeed or survive in different situations. I think a key aspect here is strengths become weaknesses. And weaknesses become strengths. Joe says the trouble is when people try Monopoly and dislike it and then avoid all board games as a result. Personally, I'd love to see a resurgence of wacky 19th century parlor games and seances. Oh my gosh. I want to be part of this resurgence. I totally agree. A lot of the games that I'm starting to look at now, broadening my design horizons, are things like parlor games, convention games, persistent games, barely games is another great category. A lot of fun stuff to experiment with there. Can you play board games alone? Actually, you can play board games alone. A lot of board games now have solo modes. Game Biologist says, too many family stories of witches and creepy goings on when folks toyed with the supernatural. Man, I will say, yes, I will say, I've never actually done a seance. I haven't played with Ouija boards. A lot of those things I was interested in when I was younger, or like the some of the creepier party games like Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board. It's like I feel, again, being easily creeped out by some of these things and very open to believing these types of things and having experiences in my past where I feel like I just touched on the supernatural. These things have the potential to really stick with you. And remember, it's like, no, we actually did come across a ghost. We actually did experience the supernatural. Yeah, Game Biologist has been playing solitaire for over 40 years. Lots of new solo games out now. Joe says, I quite like cooperative games, partly because they have built-in solo mode and because they're fun with my friends. I tried Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board, and I was disappointed that it didn't work. Yeah. I like board games in general because you do play with friends and it provides a nice social springboard for having a good time. I think that's a big thing about the modern day resurgence of board games is the social aspect to it. It's interesting that the solo game mode thing is expanding. I think they're very synergistic, giving people an opportunity to play by themselves, playing online digitally. A lot of games are going digital now. There's a lot of board games that are coming to the Switch, which works great for people who want to learn the games and be able to come to the table. I remember talking about Sentinels of the Multiverse and having a digital version, and how people were able to play the characters in the digital version, learn how the game works, learn how the characters work, and then felt a lot more comfortable playing it with their friends because they'd been able to try it out a little bit in the privacy of their own universe and their own home. I work at your local 711. It's hard, it's rare for people to come together with free time to play board games. It's an ongoing issue for people. And another reason why it's good to have the option to do a real world game, or to play a game with people in the same space, or have the option to do it digitally. There's also an element of, for some people and some locations, it's a lot easier to do that. I live in a metro center, and any night of the week there's board game stores all around. I know a lot of people, I have a lot of friends who play board games, so it's easy to get people together to do it. I know people who live in more rural areas or who don't have local game stores who find it a lot more difficult to be able to get those game groups together. Or depending on your work situation, your family situation, it can be easy or more difficult. So I think it's great. There's the option to do it digitally, to do it in person. I like conventions as a way for people who can travel and meet up with people to be able to play games in person. And it's something I want to encourage. I love that there's more board game stores popping up around the country and around the world where people can play games together. And sometimes just an activity, if it's something that you can encourage, like you can be that person who gets your friends into board games. And a lot of the newer there's so many fast, light, easy games that play in like 15 minutes, 20 minutes that you can get people into even if they aren't traditionally board gamers. Game Mother says, if you ever run into me at a con in the future, ask about the ghosts in the house. I won't. I want to make a note of that because I want to hear. I feel like I want to hear about the ghosts, but maybe it'll be super scary and I will regret. But I love stories, and I like ghost stories. I'll probably be a wimp and get scared, but it sounds super interesting. Board games help get me out of the house to see some friends in person. Play Star Realms on my phone every day with friends, which reminds me it's my turn. I haven't checked out the digital Star Realms yet. I started playing Galaxy Trucker digitally, and that got me sucked in because it was super fun. I know enough board game meetups that getting together with people to play games is pretty accessible. Meetup.com and local stores are great for finding game groups, but yeah, if you're in a densely populated area, yeah, sometimes you have to be the person to start the group. Game It Out just says, I've tried playing games online with friends, just ends up feeling like an obligation to meet play commitments rather than fun. I find it more fun to invite folks over every so often for a few hours. Nobody cares if the gameplay slows if everyone's having a good time hanging out. Yeah, I think with digital versus in person, it's just really fascinating. The lived experiences of people playing these games and the difference. The digital experience is very different than the in-person experience. I played role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons, for a long time digitally, and I would say I enjoy it a lot more now that it's physical and in person. There's less of an option for people to kind of tune out. When you're playing, people are much more present when you're playing an in-person game. think it's great. There's all the different options for different people to do. Some people really enjoy one type of interaction over the other. So it's cool that we have options to do these in all sorts of different ways. Oh man, we got a little bit off the rails there, friends. But that's cool. I like coming up with new ideas. I think we came up with something really cool here, the musicians versus mummers. But I think an important part of this stream as well is just chatting. You know, this is why it's in the just chatting category. We get to talk about our thoughts about games, the kind of games that we're playing, design philosophies, what it means to have a game be a role-playing game versus a board game versus a digital game. And like I said at the beginning of the chat, for this stream in particular, I don't find it important to put a pin in it and have a finished game concept that we can go forth and test after all is said and done. I think it's more important that we just come up with cool stuff. And I find myself a lot more creative and innovative when I'm sitting here chatting with y'all than when I'm getting caught up in my own head and my own ideas. Come up with stuff that we never would have come up with. I never would have come up with without you. So it's really cool and really fun. I appreciate you all joining me here every Tuesday for a couple of hours. As always, I always like to hear people's feedback, if they like where the show is going, if they want to see it go in one direction versus a different direction, if they find it useful, if you have any questions about board game design in general, you can always hit me up here or on Twitter. And ideas are cheap. Anything that we come up with here, feel free to riff off of it and take it in your own direction. If two people take the same idea and go in two different directions with it, it's never going to be the same thing. So always happy to see what y'all are working on, what you come up with based on these ideas. And yeah, I hope this is useful for you. I really enjoy it, and I hope that you enjoy it too. Joe says, I like your game design streams. Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate that. I know that we go off the rails sometimes, and I want to be cognizant of that fact and make sure that I'm creating an entertaining experience for you all, because it's meant to be useful. It's also meant to be fun. That's a really important part of what we do here on Emma's game design stream. Talk about games and we have fun. Yeah, I'm getting hungry, so I think I'm gonna have to cut it there. Joe says off the rails can be part of brainstorming sometimes. Off the rails is a very important part of brainstorming. On the rails is the opposite of brainstorming, because you get stuck in your mental grooves and you don't make progress that way because you're seeing things from the same perspective. And we saw things from a lot of perspectives today. At Doctor Who, I got a lot of creepy things I gotta look up on the internet now and regret, like this bubble wrap thing. I'm gonna look it up. I'm gonna be sad that I looked it up because I'm gonna be creeped out, but also happy because I'm gonna have more knowledge. I'm gonna talk to game biologists about ghosts, also be very freaked out and scared, but also enjoy the experience of freakiness and being scared. One true villain. Hello, thanks for tuning in. We're actually just getting ready to wrap up, but happy to see you here. Thanks for popping in. Senior Bob, hangry, that is me. I get very hungry and angry. Not quite there yet. Just starting to realize my hunger is coming in and being cognizant of that, and the fact that I should eat soon. Senior Bob says, sometimes we need your game designer origin story. Oh my gosh, yes. I'm gonna make a note of that. My origin story. Origin story. Oh, ghosts are just people without bodies. I almost missed that there. I'm gonna add that to here. My origin story is actually very short, very sweet. When I met my husband, Phil, then boyfriend, now husband, he was working on a tabletop card game. I was getting ready to do my Kickstarter for my science fiction novel, so I was actually dipping into some of the game design communities because there's overlap with the Kickstarters, starting to tap into some of the networks in New York City. Anyways, I started going to some of the board game designer meetups and also board game playing meetups. I was more into video games at that point than physical games. So he really got me more into the physical tabletop side of it. And after knowing him for about a year, I made my first physical board game, excluding anything as a kid that I did that never quite came together. But I made my first game, which was Heart Catchers, which was a Valentine's Day present for Phil. And I gave it to him, and he played it. It was not a great prototype. It was very much hearts cut out of construction paper and glue sticked onto the cards. So it was half board game, half Valentine's Day card. Like, I made you a game, haha, that's funny. And we played it because it was an actual game and had some cool, like, hidden information mechanics, and he said that it was actually fun and I should move forward and work on the game. And like, I like to put this in a kind way. One of the things I appreciate about him is that he won't just say things just to be nice. So he isn't just like trying to be like, oh, that's really cute. It's a good game. We actually enjoyed it and had fun. And so I moved forward and took it to a bunch of play tests. And being in that community, eventually met Tim Rodriguez, who ended up being my publisher for that game. And from there, just getting more into both the physical and digital game communities. And the rest is history. Bitten also, I didn't mention the part about being bitten by a radioactive game designer because I didn't want to freak people out about the fact that there are radioactive game designers out there who might bite you. You just appeared on Twitter one day for me. Gamebody says, I think I discovered you via Take Your Chits on Twitter. I don't remember how I found him, but I've been inspired by his workout ethic for a while now. He does have a very strong ethic when it comes to pump the steel. You can't just toss out novel and not talk about it. Gosh. Alright, we're doing this. Yeah, there's a novel. It's on Amazon. You can buy the digital or the physical copies. Damn. I need to write the sequel to it too. It is very much a first-time author's novel, so reader beware. I'm not going to imposter syndrome it. There's a lot of very cool, very interesting stuff going in there, but I'd like to think when I finally get around to writing the sequel that I will have improved my skills. The paperback is $130, so you know it's good? What? Oh, holy crap. What? Buy used for $4,996.01. Huh. That's so fun. Man. This is a good thing I'm looking at this now because that's so funny. One collectible? Because I had the paperbacks up there. They must have sold out. That's really funny. I actually have them right here. I have a stack of them. And show it off. It's a real book. Oh, yeah. Look at all those pages. It's got my name on it. This is one of my favorite parts. When I was growing up, I used to look through books and see the author's name on every page and think, oh, someday that can be me with my name on the book. That was really fun. seeing that in real life. I have the paperbacks. I also, for the Kickstarter, made some fancy hardcover editions. I'm going to make a note to myself to see if I need to resupply the copies on Amazon, or if they're just not selling on there for some reason. It's the kind of thing, if you're not selling a ton of copies, you don't always check up on, but it's good. If you got things out in the world, check and make sure that people can buy them, because people want to give you money for your cool stuff that you're making. Sign them, it'll double in value. $8,000. Yeah, I'm not seeing any of that $8,000. I should, now that I know that that's the value of the book, I should get some more copies up there and start sneaking them onto the market with a signed collector's edition hardcover version. Didn't know you were a novelist. That's awesome. Thank you. I was gonna say, well, it turns out all you gotta do is write, how much did it end up being? Write 80,000 words and then pay someone to print copies and then run a Kickstarter for it. But I actually wrote 200,000 words and deleted like 120,000 of them. So writing a book is a lot of work, especially if you do it right and get an editor. I spent a lot of time. I spent a lot longer writing the book than I have on developing games. Just reading it just takes, it's like developing a video game, it's just but in chair time. You just spend hours going over it, agonizing over turns of phrase, reading the beginning and the end, the character development, good here. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun and very gratifying to create these characters. And similar to game design, that you're creating a user experience, but you have more control over the user experience because it doesn't have the interactive element. As a game, the user experience arises from the rules you create, and you only have so much control over the translation of the rules into the user experience. But for a novel, you have a much more heavy hand, a lot more direction. It's like making a movie or a play, right, where you're guiding the users, the readers, through a set very distinct experiences. Only 2 copies at a time. Artificial scarcity. The used copy is really good. Oh my gosh, yeah. Cool. This has been super fun. I'm going to pop off, eat some food, resupply, restock Amazon, become a millionaire from leaking out my very rare, very valuable copies of Mechalarum. Strong heroin Kalen risks slow death for the power of biomechanical flight. This is a tagline for you. Join me again on Friday. We'll be doing a casual gaming stream where Phil and I play games and talk about games. And then I'm here every Tuesday from 4 to usually about 6 doing the streaming and also talking about game design. It's been a pleasure as always spending time with you, and I will see you again soon. Have a lovely day, week, year. I'll see you around the table.